Happy New Year and welcome back to Sociology 101. As you can see, we have Brad Wilson back with us today. Brad was with us exactly 1 year ago today on New Year's Day for 2022, and he shared his testimony with us with regard to leaving Calvinism. Brad and I are college friends, and he's one of the many people back in the college days that could attest to my Calvinistic transition, I guess. And so we talked about that in our last episode. If you want to watch that episode, you can go to the show notes because we have about 12,000, 13,000 more subscribers than we had last year at this time. And so that's exciting. And so those who are new to the broadcast, you can go back and watch my broadcast with Brad to talk about his testimony of why he left Calvinism. But this time, we're going to be talking about kind of what's happened since then. Kind of the fallout, or I don't know if fallout's necessarily the right word. What happens after you leave Calvinism? Because there's a lot of people who go through this process, people who transition from one belief system to another system, and it affects people around them. I know I have my own stories of the people that were impacted by that, and I know Brad does as well. So welcome back, Brad. I appreciate you coming back on.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. Been looking forward to it.
Well, Elaine mentions this. She says, I was thinking about your friend recently. New Year's last year was when he shared with us his story. Excited to hear how he's been doing. God bless you, Dr. Flowers. Your ministry is not in vain. I appreciate that. Always appreciate the encouraging words. And I know that this time of year, there's always new stories coming along. I've gotten, at the end of the year, you got end of the year donations that people make donations to the ministry, and I appreciate that, by the way, all of our patrons and donors. But oftentimes with those gifts, there comes a story with it. And I've been reading about 3 or 4 stories just earlier this morning, and they were just so encouraging about how this really helped their family or really helped their relationship with the Lord. And so thank you for sharing those things. Believe it or not, it's easy to get kind of overwhelmed with the negative comments out there on social media, and the positive comments from you all really do help keep me going. And so I appreciate that very, very much. And I know that a lot of you have gone through what Brad has gone through, because I hear from you through social media about leaving Calvinism and having to leave a church, or going through conflict with your pastor or a friend or even a spouse. And everybody goes through a different, process, obviously. Sometimes it's easier for some people than others. But I thought Brad was a good kind of testimony for us to talk through this and to kind of maybe give you a chance to ask questions in the side chat. Maybe Brad and I can field some of those questions if you want the little bit of wisdom that we have between us that we could share with you about what not to do. Brad and I are pretty much experts on the things not to do. That's what we're really good at. We're really good at that.
Right.
It's exactly right. But Brad, tell us, maybe, it's been exactly 12 months to the day since the last time we talked. So what's been happening? And you got any advice for us and the listeners?
I don't know what kind of advice I might have, but what I will do today is we'll kind of walk through the events that unfolded as I was leaving Calvinism, and kind of what I went through, kind of how I handled the situation, how the other situation was handled as well. And I think what your listeners are going to see today is that there was some issues on both sides, and so, because it's not always just the Calvinists who create the issues, and so I want us to try to walk through it and see it. I want to see the real stuff, and I don't want to try to sugarcoat anything. I'm not going to try to, and then I also don't want to make people look worse than they were. You know what I mean? I want to try to be gracious, and I want to try to present things as they really happen. And I think we can learn some stuff from that. I think there's a lot of stuff that I did that I could do differently, and I think that there was some of the stuff that happened on the other side that could have been done differently as well. And so we'll talk about those and see what see what your listeners think about that, and they may have some thoughts on it, and they may have maybe they got some advice for me. I don't know. So,
That would be great. Tell us what's going on.
all right. Well, so in our last video, we talked about all the things that led me up to leaving Calvinism. And one of the things that has to happen, especially if you have a leadership position in your church, is you have to tell somebody. You can't keep going. You can't keep going along there and just and the status quo. You have to talk to someone. And I knew from the beginning that I was going to have to talk to my pastor at some point. And but I kept pushing that off. And one of the things that I kind of thought about regretting early on was talking to other men in the church. So I had some really close friends there, and um, and so one of the things that we do, you want to be able to talk to people, right? I mean, that's what Christianity is about. And when we love one another, we should be able to go and talk to people about things that you're struggling with, your hurts, your concerns, and all that kind of stuff. And so I did that, and I had a handful of guys that I went and talked to, and I talked to them about my concerns with Calvinism. And we talked about predestination, election, those kind of things, and of course they were not on board with me, but I had a really good ministry with them, and they trusted my opinion, they trusted my teaching, they trusted my when I would talk to them about what the Bible says, there was a trust factor there. And so I think looking back on it more than anything, it scared them, you know, because now all of a sudden here I am, totally different views than what the pastor has, which prior to that he and I had been just you know lock in step with everything. And so I kind of think that it scared them for the most part. But one of the things that I did, well, let me back up for a second. I was going to say that one of the things I thought about doing was well, I shouldn't have went and told them, but I don't really regret going and telling them because that's what they're for. And those were Christian brothers that I should be able to go to and talk to and express concerns for and stuff. And so I don't regret that. And I don't think anybody should regret that. I think that you should have relationships in your church that where you are comfortable enough to be able to go and say, hey, I'm having some really, I'm struggling really with some views that we're teaching, and my theological landscape is beginning to change. We should have the freedom to go and do that with their brothers and sisters. And so, me having to go in and doing that, I don't regret doing it. I think there are some ways I went about it that could have been different. Um, so, one of the main things that became a critique in how I handle stuff was as I talked to these other men, I made the comment of, "Hey, don't tell my pastor." And of course, that's his name. I ain't calling him pastor, but I said, "So don't tell the pastor yet." I didn't because I knew I needed to talk to him. But he's very smart. He's very sharp. He's very biblically astute, and I knew that I needed to have my thoughts in order to be able to talk to him about all this stuff. And so these other men that I talked to, they were more like sounding boards to me. I would be able to talk to them, get feedback. I could be able to refine my positions, refine what I was talking about until I had a better understanding of where I was. And but and so as I was talking to them, I would ask them to not tell the pastor. And so I think looking back, I could have done that differently. Well, I eventually got to the pastor, and asked him and told him. But I did it. I did it very strategically. I did it on a day that I knew he was extremely busy, and that we would not be able to actually sit down and have this conversation. But I wanted to get the ball in his court. You know what I mean? And so I caught him at a time when he was very busy. Kind of threw it out there. We had a very short, discussion about it. I said, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm going through some stuff, and I'm no longer in the Calvinist camp." And he thought, "Whoa, well, what camp are you in?" And he said, Arminian. Oh, no, 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 not Arminian. But in a Calvinist mind, that's the only two there are, right? And um, so there was that, and we kind of left it at that because he kept getting interrupted, which was fine with me because I didn't have to go into a lot of detail about stuff at that moment. And but it's one thing, and I may have mentioned this in the last place. One thing to be able to say what you don't believe, but it is a totally different monster, whole nother ball game to articulate what you do believe. And so I knew what I didn't believe, but I didn't really know what I did believe at that point. And so I wasn't in a position to be able to sit down and go through that. But I wanted him to know that I was struggling. Anyway, there was about 2 weeks there went by with nothing else. And then one day it was on a Monday. I remember he called me or he texted me at work, and he said, "Hey, I've gotten 5 complaints that you are trying to divide the church, and that you are trying to sow discord in the church." He said, "It breaks my heart that that people think that, but in light of what you told me a few weeks ago, maybe we should talk." And I said, "Yes, sir, bring it on." And so he came to my house that very day, that evening, and we talked for about 3 hours about not about the position, not about theology, not about where I was, but about how I went about talking to other people and asking them not to tell him. And so, and so I, so I mean, and we had a good discussion, and we left, and then we left kind of what I thought was on good terms, what I felt like was on good terms. But there were 5 or 6 people in our church who saw me as a divider, someone who was trying to split the church up. And I didn't feel comfortable, for one thing. That was on a Monday, and we ended that conversation that evening with plans to have another meeting coming up Thursday night, where we would sit down and just talk theology and try to figure out, and I would have an opportunity to be able to tell him what I believed. And well, that didn't happen. Something came up. I was busy roasting coffee. He was busy doing something else, so it didn't work. It wasn't good for either of us. We were both just really busy. But then it never happened after that either. We tried 3 or 4, 5 times to try to get together and do something, and we could just never get it to come to fruition. But that Sunday, when after that meeting, I got up Sunday morning to go to church, I'm like, I don't feel like I want to go. I don't, there's people in that church who are going to look at me as the guy who's trying to tear our church apart. And I had told the pastor that if that is the case, I said, I will leave. That has never been my intent. It's not what I want to do. That's the furthest thing from my mind. And so if that becomes an issue, then I will be the one to leave. And so
Now, in your classes, were you like teaching provisionism? Were you teaching anti-Calvinism, or were you just maybe bringing up questions that you were having? I mean, why were these complaints coming into the pastor, do you think,
well,
about your being divisive?
it didn't have it wasn't coming from it was coming from these. I don't know for sure where it's coming from, Leighton, but I didn't discuss it at the church. I didn't discuss it. I mean, I preached several sermons during this time, during my transition time, and um, I didn't I didn't articulate anything in any of those sermons that would cause any red flags or anything. And I had already stepped down from teaching my Sunday school class because of a different issue. I was just like too busy to be able to commit the time to preparation, and so I had already stopped teaching that Sunday school class. For that was supposed to be kind of temporary, but I had preached a few sermons, but nothing in those sermons would indicate that I wasn't on board with everything that the church believes. So it wasn't coming from people in there. The only place that it could have came from is from people who I had talked to in private, away from the church. Who those are, I have no idea. If it was one of them, or if it was two or three of them, or whatever, I don't know. I specifically requested not to know who did that, because I really and truly do not want to think less of any of those men than I thought of before any of this happened. So if I don't know who it is, that's better for me. I don't have to. I don't feel like I don't think less of any of those, because I don't know who this is. It could have been any one of them. It could have been all of them. I don't know. But what I know is I don't think they did it with a malicious intent. I think they really believe that they were protecting the body. I believe that they were protecting the body of Christ, and I think that what they did, whoever did it, they felt they did the right thing. And if they felt they did the right thing, then I think they did the right thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, yeah, it totally makes sense, because obviously, even back when you and I were Calvinists, if there were somebody in the church we knew, was no longer teaching Calvinism, and I was a part of a Calvinist church, I would think I would do the same thing. I
Right.
think I would probably tell my pastor, like, out of concern for them teaching falsely, if they're a teacher or something like
Right.
that. And I've seen the opposite, where a Calvinist was teaching in the church I grew up in. That split over the issue. I ended up going with the Reformed Church, obviously, back in the day. But when he was preaching Calvinism in his class, it was the non-Calvinist going and telling the pastor, "There's a
Right.
Calvinist teaching in the
Right.
class." So that happens both ways, and it's,
Right.
I mean, to be expected, I would guess. Yeah.
It should happen. It should happen. I mean, if you feel like somebody teaches something false in your church, that has to be addressed. And so, I think that's what happened. So I don't hold any kind of animosity towards anybody. I don't. There's no grudges or anything like that. I think they did exactly what I would have done. And so uh, and I would expect them to do it again. Excuse me.
Yeah, and some people are mentioning the audio. Brad and I kind of try to work on the audio a little bit before we started, and there's just some glitches, I think, in the headset that he has there. But that's just the best we could get it. So I understand the audio is not super clear, so apologize for that. But if y'all want to donate a microphone
Yeah,
for Brad and send it to him, I'm sure he'd be glad to take it.
I'll take it.
be able,
Whatever.
be able to hear us a little better, hear him a little better. But so sorry about that. And by the way, Brad, I wanted to give a shout out to one of my listeners. I didn't get permission to give his name, but he sent me a little one string banjo, and he sent a
Awesome.
really nice. He sent a really nice note that said, "Thank you for plucking on that one string. I needed to hear it." and he gave me his testimony. I think it was maybe a guy that it was a former Calvinist. I've read so many different messages, I forget which story was which. But thank you for that. I
Yeah,
have it
that's
sitting.
cool.
Yeah, I have a
That's
little
cool.
little thing that it sits on, little stand that it sits on right there in front of me, so to keep me a reminder of that. So Elena is on the side chat, who is a former guest. I think you know Elena as well. I've
Hmm.
heard some of her podcasts,
Yep.
but she was saying a few things while you were talking because she's been through the same thing.
Yep.
And she said speaking out has its costs. It's deciding whether or not it's worth the foreseeable cost or not, and that's hard. And I would imagine you can relate to that for sure.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It was. You can't. It's a double-edged sword. If your theology landscape changes, you can't stay quiet about that. You can't continue going the way you're going, or continue in the church that you're in when your theological landscape changes. There has to be a decisive point, or a point where decisions are made. You're either going to begin to teach what you believe to be correct, which would be the right thing to do. You have to teach what you believe. You can't keep teaching something that you no longer believe the Bible teaches. You get into all kinds of situations like that. I mean, in
Yeah.
problem situations like that. But you also, out of respect and courtesy and love for the body, you can't you can't keep. I mean, you can't. What was I fixing to say? You can't not teach what they believe. Like I could have easily continued teaching that class and went along with what their doctrinal statement said. I could have easily done that, and and no one will ever known the difference. But I can't do that. That's a violation of my own conscience.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
there is a point. At some point, a decision has to be made. Are you going to
Yeah, I think
continue? Are
there's a time in which you finally got to say, and I can't, in good conscience, support or continue to be silent, especially if you're in a leadership teaching role.
right?
If you're not a teacher or a leader, it's a lot easier just to kind of sit and soak and not really. I mean, because you're not really influencing anybody's beliefs anyway. But when you're teaching on a regular basis and you're going through curriculum or passages that are confronting these issues, and it's inevitable. If you're teaching for any length of time, you're going to come across
Yeah.
some of those difficult passages. Elena follows up. She says, I've been called a Pelagian, a heretic, divisive, attacking God's sovereignty, brainwashing, bashing my old church, deceiving, that I'm in great danger, you name it. Yeah, I'm familiar with all of those too, Elena. So I've heard of all. And then she mentions all those are behind my back. No one's actually called and talked to me. Yeah, and that's sometimes the hardest, especially if they've been friends, and then all of a sudden you're hearing secondhand,
Yep.
from behind your back that they're saying things like this about you, and that's a hard thing to go through. I mean,
Yep.
that's difficult. But did you find yourself grieving loss of friends, fellowship there? Uh, Talk about that a little bit. What did that feel like?
Um, we did for a little bit. It was a very unique situation for us at that moment because we had already, um, there were about 2 or 3 Sundays that we actually had visited other churches, not for us, not for me, not for our benefit, but we were trying to find a good place for my kids to have like do something on Wednesday nights, or larger youth groups of people their age, and people that they knew who went to their school, stuff like that. Kind of get them more into a social uh, setting in terms of churches. We actually had visited a couple other churches looking for them to do on non Sundays. We didn't have any intention of leaving our church or shipping our kids off to a different church for Sundays. It was all part of the thing. Um, but also at the time all this stuff came out, we had already been to a couple other churches and already had started made a few friends at one church, which is where we are right now. And I was thanking him. Thank him. Tim's a good consistent customer. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, he's mentioning that. Yeah, for those that don't know, Brad brews coffee, and that's a part of his business. And so, if you want to try some of Brad's coffee, I'll make sure to let him tell you a little bit more about how you can order that if you'd like to. So, some non-Calvinist coffee. So, hey,
right, yeah, non-Calvinist coffee. So anyway, we were kind of already in a little bit of a transition, but not without really knowing it. I guess I don't really know how to explain that, but after the pastor and I had our conversation, and then our second meeting didn't come to fruition, I got up Sunday morning to get ready to go to church, and my wife said, I just don't feel. I mean, I had like butterflies in my stomach. I'm like, I just don't feel comfortable. I mean, there's people there. I mean, we're going to walk in. There's people there looking at me as if I am there to try to split that church.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. That's not my goal. I don't want to do that. I mean, that's not what I was after. And so I went, you know what? We'll just go to a different one. So we went back to the other church where we are now, and with the full intent that this next week we would get all this stuff straight out. You know, we'd get it all hashed out, and then we'd be back over there with our church family, and everything would be great. Well, it didn't happen again, and so we went another week. And so I got up Sunday morning. I'm like, I don't want to go. I don't feel comfortable there. I mean, it's just not the place I want to be right now until we get all this stuff sorted out. Well, we're a year plus now past that, and I don't think anything's really gotten straightened out. Now, having said that, I will say that the pastor and I, we are still very, very good friends. Our friendship transcends any kind of theological landscape that we might have, and I thank the Lord for that. We're still very good friends. We don't talk quite as much as we did, but you know, we're not at the same church. We're not going to the same events. We're not running in the same kind of circle, and so, but we don't talk near as much as we used to. But our friendship is still solid. Our friendship is still, like I said, it's larger than any kind of than whatever our theological landscape is. And we were able to have some pretty good conversations over the past year. Most significantly, this past Thanksgiving, my family ended up going to his family's home for Thanksgiving. We spent Thanksgiving together. And so, you know, but we still haven't had that. We still haven't had that theology discussion where we're just good friends. We talk about everything under the sun, except that thing.
Yeah.
But that's coming. That we will have that. I know y'all don't know this. He and I used to do a podcast, television, kind of a TV podcast thing called The Long and the Short of It, where we did discuss theological issues, him and I together, and we did talk about theological issues, and that just kind of went aside when all this came out. You know, with me, we just didn't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I had kind of dreamed, I guess, in my mind, is that as my theology was changing, that he and I would be able to continue doing that show where we would be able to address these issues, and we would have different understanding of the different texts. We would be able to discuss these things in a manner that was profitable. I kind of had that dream that kind of went out the window, you know, when everything went down. But in one of our recent conversations, I brought that up again, and he said, "You know, that's funny you bring that up because I was just thinking about that like 2 days ago, and how I think how we ought to start our show back up. And he said that one of the men at his church had asked if he had considered doing that show again. And so, now, as of today, there are some plans for us to start that show back up, and it'll be quite different than it was before. That's for sure. So I'm not sure how it will play out. I'm not sure. I don't really know what to expect from it. But the plan is to start it back up, and we'll see how that goes. But anyway.
Well, I think we may have to reschedule a little bit, maybe more talking about this later, because there's quite a few who are saying that the audio is bad enough that they're not able to understand a lot of what you're saying, and there's a few times I'm even having a little trouble following you, and so we may need to bring things to a close. But I do want to highlight a few things here. Aaron mentions, he says, I understand avoiding arguments, and in this instance, speaking out. My question is this: what is the hill that you're willing to die on when Calvinism comes up? And that's a really good question, because there's a lot of quote unquote Calvinists out there who are still all about God loves everyone. For example, John MacArthur still talks about the love of God for all people. Now, you can nuance what you mean by love, and I wouldn't call that love by the truest definition, but they still are all inclusive in the expression of God's love for all people. God desires all people to be saved. You'll hear Phil Johnson talk about this, about how hyper Calvinism is taking away the longing desire for all people to be saved.
Yes.
Charles Spurgeon speaks out against this too, about taking all the alls out of Scripture and dynamite to the text. To me, that's that's the breaking point for me, is that when Calvinism becomes so consistent with itself that it removes the alls of Scripture and the genuine desire expressed of God to want all to be saved. When you go there, that's done. I mean,
Right.
I'm not fellowshipping even with you anymore, really. I mean, that's just,
Right.
that's a hill I would die on, if that helps.
Right. And I think I mentioned that in our last video, that these people who, Calvinists and those who go to that length are, I don't think they're in the kingdom. It's heresy as far as best I can tell. But I will also say this, that I don't know very many Calvinists who are consistent. The only ones I know are online. And so I don't know any Calvinists. Anybody that I've ran in circles with, they're all inconsistent. Thank God. I mean, I thank the Lord that they're inconsistent.
Well, I do hear more and more who are, instead of taking the two wills of God approach, God does, yes, express his love and desire and longing for all people as the prescriptive or external will, but then the hidden will, the decreative will, that's the Piper approach, MacArthur approach, the Spurgeon approach. The James White, quasi James White approach, and some of the higher, more consistent, quote unquote, Calvinists out there are trying to remove the alls and say God doesn't really want or desire or express love for all. That's growing. And I mean, Phil Johnson predicts that hyper Calvinism or higher forms of Calvinism will eventually kill the rise of Calvinism, because and so I predict that's probably what's going to happen as well. And so we'll see what ends up happening. But
isn't that usually what kills it? Because we're in a cycle. I mean, we cycle through. Calvinism gets popular, and then it is not popular, and then it gets popular again. I suspect that it is the hyper version of that Calvinism that kills it every time.
Yeah.
I mean, because if you start following Calvinism out to its logical conclusions, you have to remove the alls. And when people start doing that, then they go, oh, no, wait, we go back, and then it just kind of falls off. And we're back to a whosoever will kind of theology. So,
Well, I'm really sorry your audio's not coming through real well. I wish we could have a longer conversation, but it starts driving. I think it starts driving people nuts when they can't hear what you're saying. Right. So, I did want to mention there's a couple of guys that said, there's the non-Calvinated coffee that you have there, and the is that coffee predestined to be drank? One says, I thought that decalvinated. See,
Decalvinated.
you should start a brand called Decalvinated.
Yeah.
Tell people where they can go, Brad, to find your coffee if they want to order that.
Let me see. Can you see that clear enough? That is Island Brow Coffee. That's islandbrowcoffee.com.
Islandbrowcoffee.com. Islandbrow, BROW, coffee.com.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep. And you can check it out. And there's some guys in the chat there who's had it. And there has been a number of people who from our last video who reached out and made orders. And I don't think any of them only made one order. I think they've all returned. They're all return customers, and so.
Well, yeah, people once they try your coffee, they keep coming back. That's the way it works. So, James is asking, do you guys offer grad studies? Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, trinitysim.edu is where I teach, and yes, they do offer studies of all kinds. So, yes, James, go to trinitysim.edu if you're interested in that. I was trying to see if there's any other questions that people may have before we bring this to a close. And like I said, we may record something down the road again when we get a better microphone. Idol Killer Warren, who's going to be on Wednesday, by the way, come back on Wednesday because Warren will be here. But he mentions the cost of leaving Calvinism was incredibly steep for him. But his integrity demanded it. And I was pretty blessed to be where I was working with Texas Baptist when I left Calvinism, because Texas Baptist, like I've said, is not the very Calvinistic convention in Texas. And therefore the leadership and many of those who are, now there are some obviously Texas Baptist Calvinists, but they're very far and few between. And so I've had a lot of support from Texas Baptist pastors and ministers and others who have actually supported what I do on a regular basis. Matter of fact, we got more listeners in Texas than anywhere else in the world, and so I'm appreciative of that. But I was thinking the other day, what if I had been a part of another convention, or what if I had been employed in evangelism with a group more Calvinistic leaning? How much more that would have cost me, and what would I have done had that happened? Would I just not have started Sociology 101? Would I have just kept quiet about it? Would I have just kind of focused on other things? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'd like to think that I would have integrity like Warren to kind of come out and maybe leave or find another place of ministry. I don't know. But I honestly just don't know how I would have handled it. But some people aren't always that blessed to have a situation where they can continue in their field of ministry. Somebody was texting the other day or tweeting the other day that I should. Back to the one-string banjo thing, they were saying, there are people complaining about the one-string banjo. They said, I wish there were more of it. You should do this full time. I said, well, if you know any great, financial benefactors that would like to start this full time, then I guess I could pray about that. But I love what I get to do with Texas Baptist. I can't imagine not doing that. But yeah, there's more than enough work to be done. You think about all of the ministries out there that are, centered around Calvinism, like the Gospel Coalition, Grace to You Ministries, Leighton Ministries, Together for the Gospel. I mean, all of these produce all kinds of material above and beyond Calvinism, but they're all centered around and are bound by their Calvinism. And so I would love to have a hand in or produce a publication company that was putting out materials that really focused on God's provision for all people, and that was a good, sound publishing type of place like the Gospel Coalition and others are doing. But God has to provide for that kind of thing. If that's going to happen, God's going to have to open up those doors and support for that. But I think there's definitely a need out there for more of that as people feel more called to really putting the funding and the necessary support behind something like that. I was just looking. Do you see any other questions maybe that you wanted to reply to, or any other comments that you wanted to mention there, Brad?
No, I haven't been watching them. I can't watch those and pay attention to what I'm saying. I get lost. I can't do two things at one time.
I hear
haven't
you.
been
I
looking
can't
at
either. I
it.
just try to. I try to anyway, and that's why I get tongue tied so oftentimes. But that's what I blame it on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was,
exactly. Yeah,
I was counting on you bringing in the questions that we needed to talk about.
yeah. And that's my job, and so that's what I'm trying to do. Nico is asking the question: what is your take on joining a seminary that has a Calvinistic teachers in it? I was recommended to join one, and Nico is not a Calvinist. What do you think about that, Brad?
Well, I think it depends on how many Calvinist teachers are there. I think if you got to, and it depends on what their official stance of the seminary is. If their doctrinal statement is decidedly Calvinist, I think there's better options out there. If it is not a Calvinist leaning seminary, but they employ some Calvinist professors, I think
Right.
it can be beneficial.
Well, for example, where I work at Trinity Seminary, Chris Date is a
Chris Tate.
professor and
Yeah.
who is also a Calvinist. But you're going to also get me and Tim Stratton and
Right.
Jonathan Pritchett and Braxton Hunter, who are all not Calvinists. So you're going to get a lot more non-Calvinistic influence than you would Calvinistic influence at our seminary. But it would be hard for me to recommend Southern Seminary, for example, because it's
Right.
almost exclusively Calvinistic. But it's a Southern Baptist seminary. But then New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where I got my doctorate degree, I would have no problem recommending it because there are a few Calvinists on staff, but they're not bombastically Calvinistic. In other words, they're
Right.
not going to be shoving it down anybody's throat. And you're also going to get a lot of non-Calvinistic influence as well, like from Dr. Adam Harwood. And so, yeah, there's a lot of schools out there that have a better balance than what you'll see at Southern or Master Seminary with John MacArthur. Master Seminary with John MacArthur and Southern Seminary with Al Mohler almost exclusively, if not absolutely exclusively Calvinistic. In
Yeah.
fact, I think you have to sign a document saying that you're affirming Calvinistic doctrine in order to even teach there. So, yeah, you got to be careful about that if that's something you're not wanting to pay for your education. Well, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and bring this one to a close, and maybe we'll raise some funds for Brad to get a new microphone so he doesn't have any more
I will not
issues.
I will not be disappointed.
But yeah, no worries. Remember Island Brow Coffee if you're interested in
Yep.
trying out some of Brad's coffee and supporting what he's doing as well. And appreciate all of you who signed on. And remember, come back on Wednesday where Warren and I will actually be listening to and playing through a video by Matt Slick, who was on Marlin's show, and talking about the objections they raised against our position with regard to human responsibility. And they're replying to our objections, namely Warren's objections on total depravity and the concept, some of the Augustinian concepts of original sin and some of the issues with those biblically. And so make sure you tune in for that. But until then, share Christ and show love. God bless you guys. See y'all maybe not until next year, Brad. We'll see. Right? We'll see. We'll see. Depending on when the microphone comes. So God bless you guys. Share Christ
All
and
right.
show love. Bye-bye.